subject and the topic of today's vlog is all about job interviews and what you should and shouldn't do when going for an interview for a job. Now, the reason I'm sort of qualified for giving you advice on this one is because I have been interviewing people for the past 15 years as part of being in a management position in one organisation or another, doing different things. So I've interviewed people for call centres, I've interviewed people for working in project management and project analysis, I've interviewed people for doing retail jobs. So I've interviewed lots of different people in my time, and I've kind of developed, I suppose, a bit of a do's and don'ts list of things that you should and shouldn't do, in my personal opinion, when you go for a job interview. And hopefully with sharing that with you today, that might be of some use to you. Now, some of it you might think, well, that's obvious, or I've heard it all before, or whatever. And yeah, some of it is going to be like that, and hopefully one or two things might be new to you. So let's find out. So depending on the type of job you're going for, there are always going to be technical skills that go with that particular job. So, you know, if you're going into project management, for example, they're going to want to know that you've got some idea of how project management methodology works conceptually and how you can apply your knowledge of project management to the job. If you're going for a job where you're going to be mainly doing skills with your hands, then of course you're going to have to prove technically that you understand what to do. So if you know, you're going for a job for plumbing or electrical work, etc., it's all outside of my sphere of knowledge, so I can't really help you technically, but I can give you the basics of the sorts of things you're going to have to say and do in an interview. So the obvious things, you know, turning up on time, turn up a little bit before, make sure you get into the building a good sort of 20 minutes or so before the interview, and it gives you time just to sort of get yourself composed, to sit down, to get yourself acclimatized to the temperature in the building, because sometimes, particularly at this time of year, if you've raced from a train or a bus and you're sort of getting into the building and your interview is about to start, you're already under pressure, you're already stressed out a bit, and your body's already acclimatized to a colder temperature outside. So you get inside and then you are hot and bothered and stressed out and you don't feel right, which doesn't help you perform very well in the interview itself. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, obviously dress according to how you think that organisation would expect you to dress if you were given the job. So if it's a suit and tie kind of organisation, suit and tie kind of job, then dress up accordingly. If it's more casual, then dress up very smartly on the casual side. So if it is suit, or if it is jacket and trousers but no tie, turn up with jacket and trousers, no tie, so you know you're demonstrating and they can see that you know what the company policy is. But make sure it's a smart jacket and tie, you know, not something that you'd go out kind of on the town with, too casual, but something that looks businesslike. So that's getting yourself there, getting yourself acclimatized to the place you're going to be interviewed, and also getting yourself dressed right. Make sure as well that if it's somewhere you've never been before, that you perhaps have a bit of a practice run if you can do. Maybe you sort of go there the weekend before or something like that, if you can do, just to make sure you know how to get there. Again, to remove any stress and strain that you might have from getting to the place in the first place. Okay, so what sort of preparation do you need to do to be prepared for a job interview? Well, there are lots of things actually that you can do, but the biggest thing you need to be able to do when you're there is be yourself. This is one of those things that you've probably heard many times, and it's one of those things that you probably think, well, yeah, I am myself all the time, but people do tend to switch into a different mode when they go into a job interview. They start talking as if they're reading from textbooks. They don't sound genuine, and quite often it gives the interviewer a sense of the person isn't capable of doing the job that they're applying to do, because they're talking about things they don't really understand. So I'll give you some examples of that as I go through this. But just be prepared to be yourself, you know. If you've got what it takes to do the job, then that will come across in the interview. If you don't have what it takes to do the job, be honest about that in the interview and tell them, look, you know, I'm a very, very good quick learner. One of my skills is being able to learn new things and apply them practically. I've got sort of 60% of what I need to do this job, I feel, and I can pick up very quickly and learn the other 40%. And it's usually for managers recruiting people to do jobs. I'll tell you now what the big things are that people are really looking for. One is for somebody who isn't big-headed, somebody who can fit in to a team usually. I mean, obviously it depends on the job. Sometimes if you need to have a large pair of balls, so to speak, then you know, you have to demonstrate that to some degree in the interview, but you've got to get on quite often with the guy or girl who is interviewing you, and therefore you've got to sort of demonstrate that, you know, you've got those kind of people skills. So one skill that is very important, and that's the skill of schmoozing. Now schmoozing, if you sort of Google it and find out a little bit more about it, there's all sorts of different ways of schmoozing people into liking you, and the only one way that actually comes across in a helpful way in an interview is if you're doing it and it's genuine and it doesn't sound like you're putting it on. So some really good books to read, I suppose, or one particular book that I would suggest you read if you haven't read it before you go to a job interview or before you start your working life, or at any time in your life actually if you haven't read this book. Dale Carnegie and How to Win Friends and Influence People is probably one of the best books that I've ever read. That just gives you some of the basic things about what people like about each other, and why people choose people for promotions, or people choose people as a job recruiter when they're going through the list of candidates. So this is something that I recommend you read, first of all, if you get time to do that. So be yourself, try to be genuine and try to sort of say the right things. Try to learn a little bit about schmoozing because it is important, but try to do it in a very genuine way. So the interview is likely to be based upon either a competency-based framework, or it's going to be based on a situational-based framework. And what I mean by those is they're either going to ask you about something you have already done in the past, and that's the competency based. Have you got competencies around two things, usually technical skills, so are you technically competent to do the job, and secondly they have questions around behavioural skills. So in the way you behave, do you fit in with the organisation, the culture, the values, the mission, the environment of that particular organisation? Are you going to fit in? And more, let's be really honest about this, it's not just the organisation, but it's more the person who is interviewing you. Now, it's not always the person who interviews you who you're going to be working for, but they do tend to know the person or know the kinds of things the person is looking for. So just remember that you know, it's the behaviours that you need to demonstrate. Now those behaviours for me, when I'm interviewing, are very simple actually. One is that the person isn't big-headed and they're prepared to learn. Two is that they can talk about the subject with a certain amount of relaxed sort of naturalness, if there is such a way of putting it. You know, that they come across in a way that sounds as if, yeah, I can do this. And thirdly, that they have some kind of passion about what it is you're talking about. Now that passion will die in a lot of people when they get under pressure and get into the job and start doing it on a day-to-day basis. But in an interview situation, it's important that you get across that you're passionate about the type of work you're wanting to do. And if you're not, then I can guarantee you're not going to get the job. It's very rare that you'll get the job if you're not showing that you're interested in what it is that you're applying to do. So the next thing for me is, how do you give your answers when you're being asked a question? So if it is a competency based question, so tell me about a time when you, describe to me about a time when you, explain to me about a time when you did. if it's one of those questions, then that's exactly what they're looking for. Now, they're not looking for you to go through a whole 30 minutes of explanation. They're looking for something within 2 minutes that you can tell them, all the pithy, important bits of information that you can tell them that relate to your experience, what you have actually done. And one of the biggest failings in this is people will go into an interview and say, we did this and we did that and we did the other, because they've often been part of a bigger, wider team. And the interviewer is trained to spot that, and he's going to be thinking, right, okay, so if we did it, what did you actually do? And at times the interviewer may specifically ask you that question, but more often than not, depending on how skilled the person is at interviewing, they may just let it ride, and you may end up not getting across that you are personally capable. So what you've got to do is train yourself to say, if you get into the we did this or that or the other, you need to immediately follow that up by saying, and my personal contribution was X or Y or Z, or what I did personally was this or that, or what I took ownership of. Or, and bear in mind as well, if you are applying for a management role, you need to be using the word management in there. You need to be using words like leadership, direction setting. You need to be saying, you know, I set direction, I set the pace of this, or whatever it might be. You need to be showing that you personally were in charge and took the lead of the situation. But the next thing that's, if you're asked a situational type of question, now quite often these are asked because the particular role is quite unique and there's little experience of it in the past, or because you're not really answering the competency-based questions very well. So the interviewer may then switch to a sort of situational question, which they may say, okay, so what would you do if you were in X, Y or Z situation? How would you behave? How would you deal with? So those sorts of questions are situational questions. So you need to be prepared to say the basics of what you would do. Again, not really heavy on the answer, but just tell them, I'd be looking for this, I'd be preparing to do this, I'd be dealing with it in this way. The next thing to think about is, how do you work with other people? How do you talk to other people on a day-to-day basis? Can you deal with stress and pressure? Can you deal with conflict? Can you negotiate? Can you influence other people? So all these skills are things that come with experience. So if you think about any sort of management framework, and I know this video might be getting incredibly boring by now, so I do apologise for this, but it's just an important bit of this. If you think about the letters S, K, E and A, SKIA, these stand for skills, knowledge, experience and ability. And the things that interviewers are looking for are whether you as an individual have either got skills in something, that you have knowledge about it, you've read up on it, you understand it, that you've got experience in doing it before for a number of years, or that you've not got any of those things but you have got ability. You have got the ability to learn quickly, adapt to your environment and be able to do the job that they want you to do, even though you've not got the skills, knowledge or experience of doing it before. So have a think about that. What do you say to them that makes you sound able, capable of doing the job? Okay, so those are some of the important parts of what you need to do to be able to get yourself ready, is be able to answer competency-based questions, to be able to consider what you would say if you were asked a situational type question. Be yourself, make sure you're prepared, make sure you turn up early, not too early, not to look over keen, but not too late. Make sure that you breathe properly during the interview, because a lot of people get stressed, they start to hyperventilate, they start to breathe too quickly, talk too quickly, their voice goes, their confidence goes, and then suddenly they're sweating and not able to actually do what it is they went there to do. So train yourself to breathe in and out at the right pace to feel the right level of confidence that you need for the interview. So you're in the interview, and one of the things nowadays that managers are looking for in particular is how well can this person deal with conflict? How well can this person challenge something that's given at face value that might not be necessarily true? And this is the whole question of the political context or the emotional context of any given situation. Now, I can't really talk about this in a great deal of detail on a moto vlog on a motorbike going down the motorway with any real examples or sense, because it is quite a complicated area for you to think about and look into. But essentially, how do you respond to situations and how do you create situations in a working environment where there is conflict, where there is disharmony, where there is disagreement? Do you use that disagreement and disharmony and conflict in a positive way, or do you fight shy of it? Do you try and avoid it? Do you try to sweep it under the carpet and leave it to continue and possibly fester? So that is really, really one of the most important things. Certainly in the work that I do, I constantly come up day to day with people who do not want to do the things they have to do, and I have to find different ways of leveraging different mechanisms to get those people to do bloody things that they're supposed to be doing in the first place as part of their job. That's probably, I would say, 80% of my job is fighting fires. So how would you do that? How would you influence somebody to change their opinion, to negotiate with them, to perhaps keep a bit of a win-win situation going on? And books on influencing and negotiating are many and wide, so again, have a look on Amazon or whatever down at the library and try and find books on influencing and negotiating. Both of those are very useful sets of knowledge to have, and then try to apply them in your current workplace or in just your current day-to-day life without being manipulative, and see how those things work. So, biggest thing to think about is, how are you going to be perceived by the interviewer? And how would you be perceived if you were marked up against the other candidates? 90% probably of what will happen will be based on impressions you give that person in the interview, whether you've done testing, whether you've done group discussions, whatever you might have done or not as part of your interview process. 90% of the decision will be made in that room at that time in the mind of the interviewer or interviewers. So just remember that. And with that, if you are applying for a job, I wish you all the best. Hopefully some of the stuff I've just rambled on about for what probably is a much longer video than I would normally do is of some use to you. And do, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. I will try and help. I'm not a human resources expert, but I've done a lot of studying around it, and I've been doing the job that I do for about 25 years, so I have got a reasonable amount of knowledge, experience, skills and abilities in that area. Okay guys, thanks for watching, and I will see you again in my next video. Bye for now.